So many stories and so many defining moments. But if I were to pick out three, maybe let me start with my first international role. And I was 6 years into the company. I had done one stint on the food side in India, one stint on the beverage side in India. One was in Gurgaon, the other was in Chennai. And then came this opportunity to move to a strategy and planning role in what was then the Asia, Middle East, Africa, what we used to call the AMEA sector, everything other than the US and Europe. Very interesting role. And when I landed up there, I realized that the team that I had was such a diverse team. You know, there was somebody from Turkey, somebody from Lebanon, somebody from Guatemala, somebody from Colombia, somebody from China, no Indians. My boss was an American lady, but she'd spent most of her time in Australia. And her boss was an Italian gentleman. And the head of the AMEA sector was Saad Abdul Latif, a Jordanian. And this was the first time I really came to grips with the amazing, diverse and inclusive culture that we had in PepsiCo. But the story is not about that. The story is about adaptability. And what I learned during those years, and particularly in the first 6 months to a year, was a story of how you understand different perspectives. How do you get to ask that question, what difference does the difference make? And I realized that I could not manage the team and lead the team in the same way that I used to do in India. And I had to understand the perspectives of each individual to really get the best out of everybody. It's something which is more of resilience. And when I first moved to Chennai, I moved to a different business, from the foods business to the beverage business. From Gurgaon to Chennai, a very, very different part of the country. I was working with a different set of stakeholders, and it was tough. And often I felt that I was an outsider, okay? And at least that's how it played out in my mind. And sometimes I felt excluded from conversations, etc., etc. And I often felt, you know, maybe I put in my papers, right? But I stuck on. Something told me, you know, this is a fantastic company. This is just a different job and a different environment. And then, lo and behold, after 3 months into that role, I was a very integral part of the team. And the big change and the big difference was me in my own head. I was expecting everybody around me to change and adapt to me, but the real lesson was I had to change and adapt to them. And that really made the magic work. So this is a story of adaptability. The first one was about managing in diverse situations and inclusive leadership. This is a story of resilience and adaptability. The third one is when I came back to India into this job. I mean, a few days into the job, I realized that we were in the midst of a very complex divestiture. And I was supposed to play a very, very key role there. So all those things that I had in my head in terms of coming back to India and having a very smooth entry into the business went out of the window. I almost felt like, if you guys have done the rapids in Rishikesh, it almost felt like, the three blind mice. If you've seen those, gone on those rapids, every day was different. Every day brought its new and unique challenge. And I had moments of calm between long periods of turmoil. Literally, life was out of control. But that is PepsiCo. It brings out the best in you in the most trying of circumstances. Not everything is going to be as you expect. Life is uncertain. Second, you must have the courage of conviction that you can make it happen and go the distance. And the third is always having people around you and people who you trust, and working at the speed of trust really makes the difference. So three examples of different circumstances. The first one was more about inclusive leadership. The second one was more about resilience and adaptability. The third one also about resilience, but more around expecting the unexpected, and then how important trust plays in making things happen. I think today we are in an age of perform and transform. We are in an age of how do we, win them on the ground and strategize on what is coming ahead. And given the VUCA world that we live in, we have got to do both. So I think CFOs today are, and I see my role as less of, a custodian, less of stewardship. Yes, that's also important. That is table stakes for a CFO. Let me not shortchange that. But the bigger part is really that of a transformer, really that of a catalyst, and really that of a navigator. So you are in the cockpit of the plane and you are trying to understand what are the tailwinds and headwinds that the business faces. And you are anticipating what that means for the business and then translating that into proactive strategies and actions which we need to do given the competitive landscape that is there, right? Some are clear risks which we must navigate. Some are opportunities where we must probably need to invest a little ahead of the curve to grab the opportunity. I've seen in my professional career, the best leaders are those who are able to straddle this two bookends of strategy and execution. And I feel there is a gravity towards execution in most businesses. And execution lies, and I've talked about execution in detail in my book, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. But obviously, that's the tip of the arrow. You got to do that. But I don't think we spend enough time thinking, honestly. Sometimes we outsource our thinking to consultants who come back and present fancy slides which have the same things that you already knew, right? So we need to carve out quality time to think. Back to that rapid example that I was giving, which is we seem to be always on the rapid. But while we are on plain water, how do you utilize that time is very, very important. So I, for example, carve out time on my calendar for thinking. And I would urge my professional colleagues to do that. Because in the whirlwind of activity, in the whirlwind of being busy and keeping busy, you are missing your big job, particularly in senior roles, which is thinking. And that has a big part to do with the transformation bit. But this is something that I really love doing, putting words on paper. So that's the first thing. This pursuit of writing a book is a labor of love, something that I really wanted to do always. The second reason is I come from a very humble background, pretty much middle class family and a lot of tough times and resilience early on, and over a period of time to where I have now come. I see there is a story in there. There is a lesson in there. There are so many elements which today we don't teach in business schools. Today we don't teach in our curriculum. Things like adaptability, things like resilience, things like how do you build trust, things like how do you influence others. And I have this concept of influencing with ethos, logos, and pathos, which is a very interesting concept, and we may talk about that later. So there are so many stories which I can narrate to people who are in their careers, or people who think they're going through a tough time initially. You can make it. You can go the distance. Right? Don't let your circumstance bog you down. There is a champion in you waiting to come out. Right? So give yourself that chance. So that's the second thing which I really wanted to get out. And the third is really, I think the book is, if you look at the book, it's structured in 4 parts. The first part is about how do you develop yourself, right? And I think that's the first and the most important thing in terms of a long-term successful career. And it talks about things like resilience. It talks about things like how do you have a mind like a child, be an agile learner, shed the baggage and learn more, right? It talks about how do you build trust. Then the second part of the book is, in my opinion, the most important aspect of long-term success. And that is how do you work with people. And there I cover things like influence. I cover things like how do you collaborate, right? Those are, at the end of the day, success in an organization and a professional setup is about teams. It's about winning together. I mean, imagine a situation, Sachin Tendulkar scoring a century, but India is not winning the game, right? Nobody will remember Sachin scored the century. Maybe he will and his fans will, but the end game is really, and we have to always remember, there is an organization before there's an employee. Sometimes we forget that. So that's the second part. How do you work with people? And slowly as in your careers, you progress, your focus shifts from getting the best out of your own self to getting the best out of others, right? So you have to master that art of how you work with others. And the third part of the book is about getting things done. This is very important because at the end of the day, professional success will be directly correlated to how you deliver results, right? And I have 2 chapters there, one which talks about the 6 Ds of execution and inspirational leadership. And the last part is about finance. It's my domain. So I really, and when I went to the publisher, I didn't have that section. And so Penguin said, sorry, nothing doing. You are a finance professional. You must have something for people to understand how you build a career to a CFO. So there is a section on how you. It's not technical, but it's more about experiential learnings of how to get to a CFO. In my opinion, I think a few things are important. And the first thing is what I call having a shareholder versus boss is always right mindset. And what I mean by that is if in a room you're discussing something, think of if there was the shareholder in the room. Now, in ownership-driven companies, proprietorship companies, that's very easy because the owner is sitting there and the owner has clearly an opinion, right? I think the finance leader is the representative of the shareholder in any kind of situation. So apply the lens of the shareholder. And that is something which has guided me in my career always. Even in the toughest of times, even if I had to raise my hand against a popular decision, what gave me the courage of conviction to do so was the fact that I'm thinking of it like a shareholder. If the shareholder was the owner of the company was sitting in the room, what would he or she say, right? So to all finance professionals, I say that is a very, very important thing. That should guide you. That should be the torchbearer for you in your career. Sometimes you will be unpopular. Sometimes you may rub people the wrong way. But having said that, the seat on the table is exactly for that, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is communication. I have seen brilliant finance professionals and excellent with numbers, excellent with Excel, excellent with technical skills, etc. But they struggle when it comes to communication. Finance is the language of the business. And if you're not able to communicate the language of the business to different audiences, then you're not going to make it very far. You're going to be just behind your desk. So you have to take the opportunity to stand up, be heard, get out there. The fear of speaking, I know, is the second most feared fear, so to say, right? But if you really want to make it to the top in finance, you have to be a great communicator. And what I mean by great communicator is not just the Queen's English. It's about understanding your audience. It's about different strokes for different folks. It's about balancing data and facts with narrative and emotion, right? And telling a story. Oh, that's the second thing I would urge all my finance colleagues to focus on. The third thing is about business. You need to be a business person and you need to be a business partner because finance is not manufacturing. Finance is not selling. We are somewhere in the middle. In terms of, if I take football as a soccer as an analogy, finance plays midfield, right? When the going gets tough, you go back and defend. When you have a lot of competition or you have a tailwind, you go offend, you help your strikers, right? So finance plays midfield and you got to be that all-rounder, so to say, in cricket parlance, to be able to play different roles at different times. It's a chapter called employeeship. So in business and in management, we talk so much about leadership, right? But we don't talk about this aspect of employeeship. And what I mean by employeeship is, if you are not in a leadership role, let's just take for a minute, 10% of the company is in leadership roles, probably even less, right? Probably 5%, right? 95% of the organization are what I call doing employeeship. So why don't we talk about that? Because I think that has a very big bearing on the success of the organization, right? The unsung hero, so to say. And there is a dedicated chapter on that. So what do I mean by employeeship? Number one, how do I get my best self to work? We need to bring our head, hand, and heart to the job every day. And that's what I mean by bringing our best self to work. Now, the head and the hand will have to come, otherwise you won't survive, right? You won't be doing a good job. But the trick is getting your heart into the job, loving what you do, the passion for getting out of bed and coming to work. That's what makes the difference. And that's what companies need to inculcate as cultures. And in PepsiCo, we have that. And that's why people like me are there for 24 years, right? So it's not the head and the hand. It is the heart, which ultimately is the magic. But that's the first aspect of employeeship. Second aspect of employeeship is what I talked a little bit earlier about, is having that shareholder mindset versus the boss is always right mindset. And when I started my career, it was all boss is always right mindset. I mean, it was like, yes, boss, tell me what to do. And yeah, you're right, of course. I mean, okay. Now, in PepsiCo, we believe that everybody has an equal voice, irrespective of the seniority of the person in the room. That's the beauty of the culture. Of course, you've got to do it the right way. You got to communicate in the right way. Respecting others is a very important thing. So you can challenge respectfully, voice your opinion respectfully. So as an employee, remember, you're earning your salary not from your boss, but from the owners of the company. So your allegiance is to them, right? So that's the second aspect of employeeship. The third aspect of employeeship, I believe, is having this learning agile mind. Having a mind which is not full of baggage, but open to learning. And I've seen professionals, and including myself, right? As we become senior and senior and senior, we accumulate a lot of baggage in terms of fixed beliefs and thoughts. I've been there. I know. Don't tell me what to do. I know what's the answer to this situation, right? But you have to unlearn and relearn. And sometimes if you don't do that, life will make you do that. Okay. So another aspect of employeeship is having that learning agile mind, what the Japanese call soshing. I've got a whole chapter on that. In fact, the first chapter of the book. Soshing is a term which basically means, in Japanese, having a mind like a child. Imagine how fast children learn, right? Imagine a team full of superstars. That's going to be a tough team to manage, right? You need to be a team player. You need to sacrifice for the goals of the team. You need to help each other and you need to collaborate. Chapter on balance in my book. And that's in the first section on self-development. Today we are in a world where there's so much of pressure, so much of stress. So what do you do, right? And my theory is very simple. Think of life like a graphic equalizer. You have your musical jukeboxes, etc., where it has a treble, a bass, and then all the other stuff. If you're only focused on one, okay, if you're only focused on just job and career, right? Or when are you going to get your next promotion? Or when is the salary increment coming? Or when is somebody going to say something nice about you? You will only be a very unhappy person. And you will be kind of maxing out, just one of the equalizers. So it's very important that you bring that balance in your life. And I personally believe, as I said, I always had this love for words. But I realized I wasn't doing anything about it. So somewhere in my mid-career, I started writing. And it started with articles, it started with things which probably, I haven't published and things like that. But the sheer joy of doing it helped me relax. It helped me bring my best self to work. It helped me, give to others. And if you think of leadership at a very high level, it's about giving. Now, however, the leader needs to nourish himself or herself. Where is that nourishment going to come from? If you're only focused on external stimuli, it ain't going to happen. So you got to figure out how you nourish yourself. Everybody has a passion, right? And people are doing it nowadays. For me, it's writing. For me, it is music. And I have seen on a very stressful day, I go back and sit with my guitar and I have a couple of songs and then I am much calmer. I think brilliance is overrated. And if you think of it, the Indian education system, particularly, the way we are always about grades and marks and ranks and who's topping the class. What about those people who are somewhere in the middle? Are they written off? Now you follow their trajectory in life and see where they have got to. You'll be surprised with that data, right? So this focus on brilliance sometimes is a shortcoming. I think resilience today is much more important than brilliance. Of course, brilliance is important, right? But imagine the world that's coming. If you think about our time, and you guys are younger, but when we were growing up, knowledge was a scarce commodity. There was no internet, there was no Google, there was no artificial intelligence, ChatGPT. So you had to ask your parents, or you ask your elders, right? Today, knowledge is a commodity. Information is a commodity. Therefore, That's not going to drive success. And therefore, what is going to be important is all the other stuff that we spoke about today, which is about resilience, which is about adaptability, which is about how do you influence people with credibility, logic, and emotional connect. How do you build trust, right? Of course, you must have some basic skills, right? But focus on the working with people part and the developing yourself part. That is the foundation stone, I would say. If I were to advise people who are starting their careers, and what I could, pick up as a lesson when I was starting my career, I was driven by I need to be, good at everything, and then, good at my job, and, have the most knowledge in the room. That's the other thing that leaders suffer from today, honestly. Today, there is a little bit of insecurity if you feel that there is somebody brighter than you. I think tomorrow's leaders and tomorrow's businesses will need people who are comfortable and secure by surrounding themselves with people who are better than them. Okay, because the leader's job is not to be the best, not to know the most, but to get the best out of others. And if you, in cricket terms, if you again go back to the good old great leaders, Clive Lloyd, West Indies, right? He wasn't the best. In his team, he had Sir Vivian Richards, right? And he had some other stalwarts, Greenwich and Haynes. But he was a leader, brought out the best in his team. Well, that's what the leader needs to do. You're running your own race. Don't compare yourself with others. Right? In a career which is 30, 35 years, there'll be some people ahead of you, some people behind you. And as long as you're making progress, you today is not going to be good enough for what is required of you tomorrow to succeed. So I would just keep it as simple as that. Understanding, and in PepsiCo, we have something which we call the development discussion plan, right? And it's not just about getting a promotion, but it's being prepared for that level of responsibility, right? And to do that, the conversation is about what are your development areas. Let's say your development area is in strategic thinking, okay, or it is in conflict management, giving the hard message. Then sit down and work out a plan with your manager, with your leader, on how you will improve that. And then follow up and measure it. Take a project which tests you on that. Communication is a great example. I mean, people shy away from taking the opportunity to stand up and present. And I used to do that. I used to run away from any presentation when I started. I used to hate it, any time. Or let's say you're sitting in an audience and somebody's going, okay, now I'm going to ask a question. And then you are, ducking, looking away, and you need to the person put up the hand. Okay, so there's nothing like practice. Even today, when I talk, I have butterflies in my stomach. It's good to have some butterflies in your stomach. Preparation, I have seen, is something that always builds confidence. Being prepared for anything that you do. So when you have identify your development areas, you are the one who knows yourself the best. Nobody knows you better than you in a closed room with nobody else is watching. So if you have that insight, you know what to do, right? And then take the opportunity to practice. Give yourself a chance to fail. The best learnings, and there are plenty of examples in my book, and I've got a lot of feedback from people saying this is good, this is real, because you're talking about vulnerability, you're talking about failures. Everybody talks about success, right? The hardest lessons and the best lessons come from failure. So practice, and focus on improving yourself. You run your own race, right? So don't compare yourself with others. As long as momentum is in the right direction. If you think a professional journey and career, it's like a slope. If you stand still, you go down.